Chapter 1: The Mistress's Miscarriage. The smell of disinfectant pervaded the air in the hospital. Irene Nelson dashed out of the doctor's office excitedly with the lab results in her hands. Just when she was about to make a phone call, her cell phone rang. When she picked it up, she heard her uncle say, "Irene, is everything all right between you and Edric?" "We're fine. Why did you ask?" "I heard that Edric brought a pregnant lady to the hospital for a prenatal checkup the day before yesterday." Irene burst into laughter and replied, "You think Edric has a kept woman?" "Yes. Don't worry. Of all men, Edric's the last person in the world who would do such a thing." After Irene hung up the call with her uncle, she called Edric Myers. However, he only answered after the phone rang for a long time. "I'm very busy. Don't call and disturb me if it's nothing important. That's it for now." He sounded cold and emotionless, and hung up before Irene could say anything. Irene held on to the test results, feeling as if her burning passion was frozen instantly. Since they got married 3 years ago, Edric was always very gentle to her. But recently, there was an abrupt change in his attitude. Not only cold, even when answering her call, he was also impatient, which made her wonder what caused such a drastic change in him. With her mind preoccupied by her thoughts, Irene turned and saw a figure pop up before her. "Sis," a gentle voice called out. When Irene looked over, she saw Lily Cook, who was accompanied by a middle-aged woman. Irene frowned at the sight of Lily, who was the daughter of a mistress. With a look of contempt on her face, she retorted coldly, "Mind your words. I'm the only child that my mother has ever given birth to." Instead of getting angry by her reply, Lily merely beamed and asked gently, "Irene, are you here for your infertility checkup again?" "It's none of your business." "Aren't you going to ask me why I'm here at the pregnancy checkup area?" Lily asked and raised an eyebrow at Irene provocatively. She then chuckled and announced, "I'm pregnant with Edric's child." Irene only noticed her tiny baby bump right after she said this. All along, Lily had been very obvious about her feelings towards Edric and would always find ways to hook up with him before he married Irene. However, Irene merely sneered and replied, "Are you out of your mind? You don't believe me? Well, take a look at this." Lily then flashed her checkup report to Irene, and Irene's expression instantly changed when she saw the familiar handwriting on it. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw Edric's signature. "I spent after dark with him 4 months ago. He was such a beast and was at it all night. I was pregnant since then," Lily declared and grinned proudly. "He likes this child very much and asked me to keep him. You could step down after my child's born." "You bitch!" Irene roared and, trembling with rage, struck Lily across the face. Lily instantly fell to the ground as if she had been anticipating this. "Ouch, my stomach!" she shrieked. Irene only slapped Lily on the face, but crimson red blood began to ooze out of her trousers the moment she fell to the ground. Irene was taken aback and could hardly believe what just happened. The medical staff instantly rushed Lily off to the emergency room. Afraid to leave the scene, Irene too followed after her. After waiting outside the room for quite some time, Irene heard the sound of footsteps, and when she glanced up, saw her mother-in-law, Margaret Moore. Glaring at Irene furiously, Margaret asked, "What's going on? How did Lily end up in the emergency room?" "Miss Nelson, no, Mrs. Myers pushed her." The middle-aged woman who had been accompanying Lily answered, "You bitch! You're a fruitless tree, and yet you simply couldn't bear to watch others achieve what you failed to, could you?" Margaret shrieked and slapped her in the face. As Margaret had never liked Irene, she was merciless with her blow, and Irene's face quickly began to swell up. Earlier before, she had thought that Lily was lying, but Margaret's attitude explained everything. A burst of despair grew in Irene's heart, and it felt so suffocating that she nearly passed out. A burst of despair grew in Irene's heart, and it felt so suffocating that she nearly passed out. But right at that moment, the door to the operating theater opened and a nurse walked out to inform them that Lily had lost her baby. Margaret went ballistic when she heard this and immediately charged over to yank Irene's hair before she began to thrash and kick her. Irene quickly blacked out from the violent beatings. When she finally regained consciousness, she opened her eyes to a sea of white. She tried to sit up, but her body ached so terribly that she had to lean against the headboard of her bed to catch her breath. But right at that moment, the door to her ward opened and a man wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses came in. "Hello, Miss Nelson. I'm Mr. Myers' lawyer." "Lawyer?" Irene repeated and stared at the man before her in shock. "Yes, I'm Mr. Myers' private lawyer. He entrusted me to handle his divorce proceedings with you." "Divorce? Edric wants to divorce me?" Irene repeated and could hardly believe what she just heard. The lawyer walked over to her bed and handed her a document. "This is a divorce agreement. Please read through it." Irene's hands began to quiver. She had never dreamed that Edric would actually divorce her one day. Without reading the divorce agreement, she stared at the lawyer and ordered, "Get Edric to come to see me. I want him to tell me in person." "Mr. Myers is very busy. He doesn't have the time." "He's busy and has no time?" Irene chuckled and wondered when they had begun to be so indifferent to each other that he could not even afford to spare some time to meet her. Closing her eyes shut, she grabbed the phone on the bedside table and dialed for Eric's number, but could not seem to get through to him. How did Edric and I end up like this? An affair? A divorce? She mused. The lawyer, who was still waiting for her response, urged, "Miss Nelson, please take a look at the agreement. I'm very busy." It was obvious from the lawyer's attitude that he would not take no for an answer. Everyone had been respectful towards Irene throughout her 3 years long of marriage with Edric. Now that the lawyer was so cold and harsh, he was clearly acting under Edric's instructions. Irene held up the divorce agreement and glanced at the column on the dismemberment of property. As all the property belonged to Edric before his marriage, it was not part of the property that would be divided upon their divorcement. Irene instantly began to tear up. He once said that she meant the world to him and that everything he had belonged to her. However, he already fell out of love with her within just 3 years into their marriage. She wondered if he was finally revealing his true colors. The truth that Edric had kept a mistress behind her back and even impregnated the mistress with a child finally began to sink in. "I suppose it's time for a fruitless tree like me to step down," Irene thought bitterly. Without reading the agreement any further, Irene glanced up at the lawyer, who had been staring at her all along, and requested, "Give me a pen." The lawyer opened his briefcase, took out a pen, and handed it to Irene before he added, "Mr. Myers said that you can't take any of the jewelry that he bought for you." Irene stared blankly at the space before her and froze for a long time. Just when the lawyer thought that she would challenge this, she slowly agreed, "Sure." She then picked up the pen and signed her name on the divorce agreement quickly. After the lawyer took one quick glance at the signed agreement, turned and left. A luxurious Aston Martin pulled up in the parking lot of the hospital, and the car windows scrolled down to reveal the face of an incomparably handsome man. The lawyer quickly strode over to the car and reported respectfully, "Mr. Myers, Madam has signed it." "She signed it?" The man repeated slowly and glanced at the lawyer's face with his unreadable eyes. A lawyer's heart raced when he saw how moody the man seemed, and though the lawyer wanted to say something, he was at a loss for words. The man then turned to stare at the dark night sky. After some time, he spat out, "Let's go." Chapter 2. Her Sicko Boss, 3 years later. The night was young, and many luxury cars and reporters geared up with cameras and equipment gathered at the gates to the San Fatillo Hilton Hotel. The Golden Age Group was hosting a party here tonight and had invited the business tycoons of San Fatillo to the event. When the reporters caught wind of the news, they flocked over in hopes of obtaining news that would make the headlines. At 8 p.m., a sleek Maybach pulled over before the hotel. "Mr. Reed, it's Mr. Reed from the Golden Age Group," the reporters yelled and rushed over with their cameras and gear. Jordan Reed was dressed in a white suit and wore a frivolous smile on his face as he got out of the car. Supermodel Lulu, who was dressed in a chic off-shoulder evening dress, got out from the other side of the car. Jordan then reached out to hold Lulu's hand before they decently posed for the camera. Irene was seated in the passenger seat with a briefcase in her hand and watched Jordan and Lulu through the window. What the hell? I'm just a assistant? Why can't Jordan leave me out of a party like this? Is he a sicko or what? She grumbled silently. The driver beside her reminded, Miss Nelson, please get off the car. Young master would be displeased if you're late. With a sigh, she opened the car door and lowered her head as she got out of the car with her briefcase. As Jordan had already arrived at the entrance to the hotel, arm in arm with Lulu, Irene hastened her footsteps to keep up with them. Just when she reached the entrance, the reporters behind her exclaimed, Edric Myers is here as well. Irene turned reflexively when she heard Edric's name. She then saw an Aston Martin pull over slowly before the gates to the hotel. A security guard stepped forward and opened the car door respectfully. Edric then got off the car. He looked handsome in his black suit, and his aura was still as powerful as what it was 3 years ago. Just when Irene was lost in her thoughts, the security guard opened the door on the other side of the car. Lily Cook, in a fiery red evening dress, smiled as she slowly got out. Wow, they're such a handsome couple. You don't say. The lady's the daughter of a secretary, while the guy is a business tycoon. They're a match made in heaven. The crowd began to chatter incessantly. As Irene stared at the couple, a cold sneer appeared on her face. An unfaithful man and a mistress. A match made in heaven indeed, she thought. Without the slightest intention to stay on and watch the irksome couple, Irene quickly turned and hastened her steps to catch up with Jordan. Jordan and Lulu had already entered the elevator. When Irene noticed that the door was about to close, she dashed over as quickly as she would in a 100-meter sprint. Reaching out her hand, she managed to stop the elevator door right when it was about to close. When she entered the elevator, Jordan sneered. Miss Nelson, you seem to enjoy scaring others, don't you? I'm sorry. Irene lowered her head and apologized. Jordan snorted coldly and warned, You'd better follow us closely the next time. If you step out of line again, I'll fire you. Yes, I'll keep that in mind. As Irene was extremely polite and respectful, Jordan could not find a reason flare up at her and simply let her off the hook after glaring at her. When the elevator stopped at the 18th floor, Jordan wrapped his arms around Lulu's waist and led her out. Irene quickly followed them with the briefcase in her arms. When they arrived at the entrance to the hall, Jordan turned and instructed, Go and wait for me in the lounge. Bear in mind that you'll have to be on standby. Your bonus for this month will be halved if I couldn't reach you. Yes, Mr. Reed, got it. After Jordan and Lulu entered the hall, Irene felt as if she was relieved of a great burden and turned to dash straight for the lounge. Meanwhile, the elevator on the other end too stopped with a ding. When Edric and Lily stepped out of the elevator, Edric caught a glimpse of Irene, who was opening the door to the lounge at the end of the corridor. He froze for a moment. Irene? He thought. No, she had disappeared for 3 years. Why would she appear now? He mused. I must be mistaken, he concluded. When Lily noticed Edric staring fixedly at the other end of the corridor, she glanced towards where he was looking at, but saw nothing there. Feeling baffled, she asked Edric, What are you looking at? It's nothing. Let's go. Irene waited in the lounge for more than an hour and was so hungry that her stomach began to growl. Jordan's such a sadist. There he is, having the time of his life with a beautiful woman and a delicious, luxurious buffet that he could eat to his heart's content. Meanwhile, as his assistant, I could only starve and wait for him here. He's really an evil capitalist, she grumbled silently. Just when she was lost in her thoughts, Jordan called and instructed, Go to the hall to get yourself some food. Remember what I said. Don't wander around. Scram back to the lounge to wait for me after you're done with your meal. Yes, Mr. Reed. Irene then pulled open the door to the hall and strode right in. Although everyone was rich and glamorously dressed, she merely took one swift glance at them before she went straight for the buffet area. Irene helped herself to a glass of juice and a plate of food. But before she could find herself a place to settle down and eat, she heard someone say, "Get me some food here." Chapter 3. Mistook her for a waitress. The commanding tone of voice sounded familiar. When Irene looked up, she saw a woman who was slapped with a thick layer of makeup. Isn't she Lily Cook's best friend, Freya Howard? Irene thought. Freya was momentarily stunned as well when she saw Irene. As Irene was dressed in work attire, Freya mistook her for a waitress and was startled when she found out it was Irene. "So it's you?" However, Irene merely ignored her. But just when she was about to brush past Freya, Freya managed to recover from her shock and stopped her immediately. "Are you actually working as a waitress here?" "Haha, what a joke. Is it that funny?" Irene asked coldly. "Of course, you were so arrogant in the past, weren't you?" Tisk tisk. To think that you would end up as a mere waitress. Every dog has its day. That's quite apt for your situation now, isn't it? Hurry up and get me something to eat." Freya appeared pleased with what she had just said. As Irene was beautiful, morally upright, and blessed with a good life, she had always been an eyesore for Freya. Now that Irene was ditched by Edric and had ended up as a waitress, it was a perfect opportunity for Freya to humiliate her. Irene was disgusted by the look on Freya's face, but found it insulting to stoop down to Freya's level to argue with her. Thus, she simply made her way around Freya and strutted off. Unwilling to let things slide, Freya yelled, "Irene, how dare you disobey me? I could get someone to fire you right away." "Fire me? Miss Howard, who the hell do you think you are?" "How dare you insult me?" Freya yelled and jumped with rage. In the past, she could not do anything to Irene since she was Edric's wife, and he had protected her like a precious treasure. But now, things were different. Without Edric, she was just a lowly waitress, and destroying her would be as easy as killing an ant. "I'll tell the person in charge here to fire you right away." "Freya, what happened?" a gentle voice interrupted. "Lily, you're just in time. Look who we have here." Freya pointed at Irene and mocked. Irene glanced at Lily calmly. When their eyes met, Lily obviously seemed shocked. "Why is Irene here?" she wondered. Despite being taken aback, Lily smiled and greeted, "Sis?" However, Irene merely glanced at her coldly and replied, "Miss, I'm afraid you got the wrong person." "Irene, I know you blame me for what happened, but it has nothing to do with me. I can't help it if Edric falls for me." Although 3 years had passed, Irene's wounds were still sore, and her heart still ached at the mention of her past. Unwilling to show her weakness to them, she turned to leave. However, Freya, who was obviously emboldened by Lily's presence, instantly rushed up to Irene and grabbed hold of her before shoving her hard. The juice in the glass Irene was holding immediately spilt all over her body. As some got onto Freya's clothes, she screamed, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" Irene saw how visibly pleased Freya was when she said this. She could tell that Freya was convinced that she was a waitress and had intended to slander her so that she could get the hotel to fire Irene. Irene's expression turned frigid. In the past, she would have slapped Freya in the face. But now, she was no longer Edric's wife, and nobody would be there to protect her. Thus, she could only force herself to suppress her anger and leave. Freya and Lily exchanged a look when they noticed that Irene did nothing to fend for herself. In the next moment, they reached over, yanked Irene's hair, and doused their red wine down her neck. The cold red wine trickled down Irene's neck and soaked up her clothes. Somewhat intentionally, Freya bumped Lily with her body, and Lily, too, splashed her glass of wine on Irene's face. Irene could feel her eyes burning with pain. She initially planned to let things slide and leave, but was now angered by Freya's relentless pursuit. Freya and Lily were birds of the same feather. Judging from how they were treating her, Irene could tell that things would not end well today. Freya's tricks were exactly the same as what Lily had used back then, and they would certainly continue to slander her. Irene was also not to be trifled with, and found no reason to let them off the hook anymore, since they were bent on making her the bad guy. Boiling with rage, Irene raised the plate in her hand and smashed it onto Freya's head. Freya screamed, for she never expected Irene to retaliate when she was already in such a pathetic state. The gravy trickled down Freya's hair, into her eyes, and stung them exceptionally badly. For Irene enjoyed spicy food, and all the gravy was spicy. Freya let out a heartrending scream and instantly released Irene's hair. Ignoring Freya's shrieks, Irene went on to slap Lily in the face. Lily was completely dumbfounded, for she never expected Irene to be so tough. Just when her face was stinging from the blow, Irene grabbed a bowl of gravy and splashed it onto Lily's expensive evening dress, designed by a famous designer. Lily was terribly upset. In pain and rage, Lily ignored her public image and shrieked, "Somebody, help!" Chapter 4: Cruel Man. Many people were startled by the commotion and glanced over. The security guards, too, rushed over. As this was a party for members of the upper class, the security guards were unusually snobbish. Irene, who was dressed in ordinary clothes, was naturally taken for a waitress. Thus, without even getting their facts right, the guards immediately shoved her out of the hall. As Freya's eyes were burning from the chilly gravy, she was quickly sent to the hospital. After Edric heard of the news, he rushed over only to see Lily with a clear palm print on her face and her expensive evening gown stained with soup. Surprised by the awkward state that she was in, he asked, "What happened?" Lily was actually afraid that Edric would come to know that Irene had appeared at the party. However, she knew that she couldn't hide the truth from him now that things have reached this state. Thus she cried and complained, "Edric, I saw Miss Nelson. She's working as a waitress here. For some reason, she deliberately spilt juice on me and Freya when she saw us. Freya couldn't put up with it and scolded her, so she suddenly went berserk and dumped food onto Freya. She even slapped me." Edric was stunned and quickly scanned the surroundings, but did not spot Irene anywhere. Lily then forced out some tears and continued, "My clothes were soiled and I got slapped by her." But Freya's eyes were stung by the chili gravy that Nelson dumped on her. Miss Nelson had planned to aim for me, but Freya took the blow for me. Edric's expression was unreadable as he stared at her pitiful face. He then patted Lily, who was wiping her tears away, and asked coldly, "Where is she?" "She was taken away by the security guards. Let's go and have a look." After Edric said this, he supported Lily, who was in a mess, out of the hall. Irene was taken to the room next to the hall by the security guards. They were scolding her and calling the police. Irene lowered her head as she remained seated on the sofa. Her body was dripping wet from the wine, and she finally calmed down after she was brought here. She should have put up with them earlier on, but instead she lost control of herself and stirred up a fuss like this. Jordan certainly wouldn't let her off the hook. He was a rich playboy with a foul temper and was especially fierce towards her. Nathan White had forced Jordan to accept Irene as his personal assistant. Thus, Jordan had always disliked her and made things difficult for her. Now that she created a scene, she felt certain that he would fire her. Just when she was fraught with anxiety, the door was pushed open and a gust of cold air blew over. Irene looked up and stared right into a pair of dark, unreadable eyes. Heartbroken, Irene had left the city ever since Edric asked his lawyer to force her to sign the divorce agreement 3 years ago. Throughout the past 3 years, she had never thought that she would bump into Edric again, for she had planned to avoid him for the rest of her life. Yet on her first day back in San Fatillo, they crossed paths again in such a way. She was in a complete state of mess, while he was high above her and looking at her disdainfully, as though he was a king, while his arms remained wrapped around Lily's waist. Irene wondered if he had come to chastise her for what she had done. Suppressing the rolling emotions in her heart, Irene looked away indifferently. As she had made up her mind to treat him like a complete stranger if they were to cross paths again, there is nothing to be upset about, was there? Edric's pupils constricted when he saw Irene looking away with cold indifference. After he helped Lily into the room, he ordered icily, "Apologize." One couldn't help but tremble when they heard him. However, Irene merely pursed her lips and remained silent. He wants me to apologize to his mistress? Besides, he's demanding for my apology when I've done nothing wrong. There's no way that I would do this. Edric's expression turned darker and darker when he noticed that she had no intention of speaking up. Irene Nelson, didn't you hear me? Apologize, he ordered. Apologize? Why should I? Mr. Myers, do you think you're a king who could order me around? Irene smiled contemptuously. It doesn't matter whether I'm a king or not. What matters is the fact that you deliberately assaulted others. Freya has already been sent to the hospital. You should know the consequences. He was obviously threatening her, and Irene knew that he wasn't doing it for Freya, but for Lily. Without the slightest intention to apologize, Irene smiled and replied, Mr. Myers, you're so powerful that you could do anything that you want, so I'll be waiting to see what you could do. As for the apology, you'll get it in your next life. Edric felt strangely stifled and uncomfortable when he saw how indifferent Irene was when she retorted him in an icy tone of voice. Irene, since you're so stubborn, then don't blame me for being merciless. Edric replied and glanced at her coldly, before he turned to instruct the security guards. Have you called the police? Yes, the security guard answered respectfully. Then we'll let the police settle this impartially. We'll see how tough you could be once you're in the police station. Chapter 5. To send her to the police station. Edric wore a look of indifference as he gave those cruel instructions to the guards, and Irene lowered her gaze to conceal the look of sadness in her eyes. Is Edric's heart made of stone? I've never let him down in any way throughout our 5 years of relationship and 3 years of marriage. Why is he so cruel to me? She thought. 3 years ago, Edric had sent me packing with nothing to my name. Now that we're meeting again for the first time in 3 years, he's going to send me to the police station without even bothering to get his facts right. Men were the most cruel creatures in the world, and Edric was one of the leaders of the pack. I must have been blind to have fallen in love with such a cold-blooded and heartless man back then, she thought. Irene was adamant not to apologize, and was eventually brought to the police station. Just when the police asked her some basic questions, Irene's phone rang. It was a call from Jordan. After Irene answered the call, Jordan yelled in exasperation, Irene, where the hell are you? Didn't I tell you to wait in the lounge? I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. Irene apologized repeatedly. Something unexpected happened and I'm currently at the police station. What? The police station? Why are you in the police station? Well, Irene was at a loss as to what to say. She knew that couldn't possibly tell Jordan that she had bumped into the mistress who ruined her marriage and was sent to the police station by her ex-husband because she lost her temper and got into a conflict with the mistress. Jordan became impatient when he noticed how hesitant she was and yelled, You could stay in the police station if that's what you like. I don't need an assistant like you anymore. I'll call Nathan right away. She then heard the sound of a beeping tone on the other end of the line. Jordan had hung up the phone. Irene's heart sank when she realized that she had gotten herself into legal trouble and would soon lose her job as well. The police felt sorry for her when they saw how pale she seemed and kindly reminded her, Miss, of all the people in the world, why did you offend this couple? Mind you that the lady is Mr. Cook's precious daughter, while the man, Edric, is a business tycoon. Be sensible and apologize to them. You'll be able to resolve the matter with an apology. I have Mr. Myers' number if you need. Why don't you call him and put in a good word for yourself? Irene's lips curled up into a smile, and she replied, Thank you, sir. Now that I've lost my job and have nowhere to go, being locked up here might help me to tide through things for the time being, since I wouldn't have to worry about food and shelter. Forget about the apology. Seeing how resistant she was towards the idea of apologizing, the police sighed and left. Irene knew that Edric would not let her off the hook, and she decided to make the best out of her situation and wait to see what tricks he had up his sleeves. She doesn't think that Edric would be able to abuse his power and dictate the law. As the thought crossed her mind, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps at the door. After the door was pushed open, she saw Jordan standing by the door with a furious look on his face. "Irene, how dare you?" "Mr. Reed," Irene greeted in a low voice. "I've never had an assistant like you who not only failed to be of help, but even caused trouble for me," Jordan lectured her fiercely. However, he quickly fell silent when he saw how pathetic state Irene seemed. "What happened? How the hell did you end up in such a state?" "Someone poured wine onto me, but it's no big deal." "Who did it?" Jordan spat out the question through his gritted teeth. "It's someone whom I don't know." "I'm so ashamed of you. How could you be bullied like this?" Jordan asked and picked up his mobile phone before he called someone and instructed. "Send me 2 men. Someone bullied my assistant, and we need to teach them a lesson." "Mr. Reed, that person is now in the hospital. There's no need to teach her a lesson." "She's the one who's going to teach me a lesson now." "Good job," Jordan praised, and he instantly brightened up. "It's okay. Now that I'm here, nobody would dare to punish you. Get up, we're leaving." "Leave? Do you want to stay here?" Jordan said. He then turned and walked out. After a moment of hesitation, Irene stood up and followed after him. No one stopped her as she followed Jordan out of the police station. When they reached the parking lot, Jordan suddenly burst into laughter at the sight of her. Chapter 6. What man would dare marry you? Jordan's laughter came out of the blue, and Irene merely stood and stared at him. After laughing for a long time, he stopped. "Irene, that was fucking cool. You're so ugly and couldn't do anything well, but who would have imagined that you could be so fierce? No man would dare to marry a woman like you." Jordan had always had a sharp tongue, so Irene nearly lowered her eyes and remained silent as he spoke. Jordan couldn't care less if she was angry about what he said, and continued. "It's all because of you. You wasted my time. I'd planned to spend a night with Lulu and you ruined it. Take a cab back by yourself. Your bonus for this month will be halved." After saying this, he got into the car and left. Irene stood rooted to the spot for a while before she made her way to a nearby bus station with a heavy heart. Less than 5 minutes after she left, a luxurious Aston Martin pulled over in the parking lot of the police station. Edric was seated in the back. His assistant, John Davis, got out to open the door for him. "Mr. Myers, do you want to go in and have a look?" "That's not necessary." "Go in and tell her that we'll let her off the hook this time, but she won't have it easy if it happens again." John nodded and headed for the police station. As Edric watched him go, he couldn't help but feel frustrated at the thought of how pathetic Irene looked. "Irene, you've always been wild and unruly, haven't you? Money never meant anything to you, and you were the one who wanted to leave me without a penny to your name. Why can't you fucking live a better life? Why are you a waitress now and even landed yourself in such a pathetic state?" Edric lit up a cigarette. After he took a puff, he saw John come out of the police station. "Mr. Myers, someone took Madam away," he reported. "Someone took her away? Who? Was it Nathan?" Edric fired out 3 questions in a row, but John shook his head and replied, "No, it's Jordan Reed." "Jordan Reed?" "Ha ha," Edric sneered. Jordan and Nathan were close friends, and judging from how quickly he came to rescue Irene, it wasn't hard for Edric to tell how much Irene meant to Nathan. He then crushed the cigarette butt in his palms fiercely and said, "Let's go." Irene waited at the bus stop for half an hour before a bus arrived. When she arrived home, her uncle, Thomas, was watching TV in the living room. Seeing the state of the mess she was in, he exclaimed in shock, "Irene, what happened to you?" "I met that bitch," Irene replied her uncle truthfully. "Irene, you shouldn't have come returned. You should have stayed with Nathan." "Uncle, I can't possibly stay by Nathan's side all the time. I can't implicate him with my status. Besides, you're in poor health and I'm worried about you." "It's all my fault. I'm getting older day by day and being an inconvenience to you," Thomas sighed. "It's okay. I wouldn't remain in San Fatillo for long." The Golden Age Group expanded their operations and started a new company in Oxton, so I may be transferred to work there in the future. When the time comes, we'll leave San Fatillo and we'll never have to meet those bitches again. Meanwhile, Lily had arrived at the Cook family's residence, hurriedly getting off the car and entering the living room. "Mom, I'm back," she yelled. Deborah Jones, who was sitting in the living room, looked up. She was utterly stunned when she saw Lily's tousled hair and soiled dress. "What happened?" she probed. "Let's talk upstairs," Lily replied as she took one glance at the helper who was in the living room. She then held Deborah's hand and led her upstairs. After closing the door, she immediately said, "Mom, Irene is back. What should we do?" "What? Irene is back? Really?" Deborah was taken aback. "It's true. I ran into her at the party tonight. She's pretty downtrodden and is actually working as a waitress at the party, comma." Lily then told Deborah about everything that had happened tonight, comma. "What's wrong with you? Why did you provoke her now?" Deborah chided. "I have to. Mom, think about it. Why did this bitch appear now when she was missing for the past 3 years?" Lily retorted with an angry look on her face. "She must have appeared deliberately because she knew that I was about to be engaged to Edric." "Is that so?" Deborah asked. "It must be the case. She must be indignant that I snatched Edric away from her. I'm worried that she'll look for Edric, so it's better for me to take action first." "That's a good idea. But your dad, he misses that bitch. If he knew that she's back, he would definitely go to find her, and that'll be troublesome. That's why you need to come up with a solution quickly." "I'll think about it." "Your father should never announce his relationship to her to the public," Deborah warned resentfully. Chapter 7: Nightmare. As it was getting late, Irene lay down in bed, soon fell into a deep slumber. She then began to dream. In her dreams, she had returned to that day 3 years ago when Lily showed her huge belly to her and smiled gleefully as she announced, "Irene, I'm pregnant with his child." Irene merely slapped her in the face, but that led to Lily's subsequent miscarriage. She felt afraid and angry when she saw the blood that was splattered all over the ground. Smack! The crisp sound of a slap could be heard, along with the vicious cursing by Margaret. "Bitch, you're a fruitless tree, and yet you simply can't allow others to do what you failed to achieve, could you? This is the divorce agreement. Please look through and sign your name on it," the lawyer said indifferently. "Mr. Myers, don't have the time to spare. Stop wasting time. Hurry and sign it. It's better for all of us." Irene had loved and fully devoted herself to Edric for 5 years. She had thought that she could entrust herself to him for the rest of her life. A searing pain threatened to rip Irene's heart apart, and her entire body was drenched with cold sweat. She then quivered and woke up with a start. She had been haunted by these terrible dreams for the past 3 years. Irene rubbed her head and sat up before she grabbed her cell phone from the bedside table and took one glance at the time. It was 4 a.m. in the morning. After Irene had roused from her nightmare, couldn't seem to fall asleep anymore. As her body was wet with sweat, she slipped out of bed and took a shower before she changed into a fresh set of clothes and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. Although Jordan looked like a playboy who only knew how to fool around, he could be trusted to handle things well. When they first arrived in San Fatello, he was exceptionally eager to get things done and completed all his tasks swiftly. He was not a man who liked to drag things on, and as his assistant, Irene doesn't dare to slack off at all. Irene quickly finished her breakfast and hurried downstairs with her bag. She lived in an old-style house that was tucked away in the alley. As the neighborhood was as old as time itself, several street lamps were already out of order. Irene exited from the alley based on her memory, and at one glance spotted bus 28 heading in her direction. She immediately bolted towards the bus and overlooked a black luxury car that was parked beside the alley. Edric watched as Irene rushed onto the bus before he rolled down his car window. He held onto a cigarette butt and stared at the direction where she had disappeared off to, with a gloomy look in his eyes. It was hard for Edric to distinguish his emotions when he saw Irene, who had been missing for 3 years and suddenly appeared. Irene, it's good that you're back, he thought. Irene rushed into the company, and because she was early today, there was nobody. She then tidied up the office and made a cup of tea for Jordan before she sat down in her seat and turned on her computer. While she was looking through Jordan's schedule for the day, heard the sound of footfall at the entrance. Jordan and his executive assistant, David Brown, had come. Jordan was rather surprised to see Irene in the office at such an early hour, and his lips curled up into a mischievous grin as he said, "Irene, are you hoping that I'll give you more bonus for coming in early? Fat hope. I would rather give my money to a beautiful woman than to an ugly monster like you. It'd be a waste of my resources." When Irene joined the company, she already knew that Jordan was a lustful man. Although Nathan introduced her, she was still afraid that she might be harassed by Jordan. Thus, to prevent this from happening, she had always dressed in conservative, old-fashioned attire whenever she was around Jordan and would not apply any makeup. She even got herself a pair of old-fashioned black-rimmed glasses once she learned that Jordan hated women who wore glasses. Thus, Jordan had never looked at Irene in the eye throughout the 3 months that she had worked with him. He was also harsh with his words and never respected her. Jordan had already insulted her looks and intelligence so many times that Irene had become immune and had learnt to ignore his sarcasm. David, on the other hand, couldn't bear to watch him insult Irene any further, and quickly began to mediate the situation. "Mr. Reed, I heard that Edric will soon be engaged. What should we get him for his engagement gift?" Irene was momentarily stunned when she heard this and looked up at David. Chapter 8: A Great Gift. For the past 3 years, as Irene had never paid attention to news about Edric, was unaware that he had yet to marry his mistress Lily. Jordan sneered coldly and remarked, "Since Myers is getting engaged to a secretary's daughter, I'll have to prepare a great gift for them anyhow. What would you like to give, Mr. Reed?" "What should I give? How would I know what I should give?" Jordan rebutted and glanced towards Irene before he instructed, "I'll leave this to you. Go pick a gift." I know nothing about gifts. Mr. Reed, please task someone else with this." Irene immediately rejected, for she was obviously unwilling to pick a gift for the scumbag Edric and his wretched mistress. "Well, you could always learn," Jordan rebutted. His favorite pastime was to torment Irene. Irene was already 27 years old now, and yet she did not dress herself up or apply any makeup, and neither does she have a boyfriend. Thus, Jordan felt a strange sense of repulsion towards Irene ever since he first met her. If it wasn't for Nathan's sake, he would never accept a woman like her as his assistant. On the first day in work, he already warned her that he disliked women who wore glasses and had instructed her to wear contact lenses when she was at work. However, she chose to defy him and continued to disgust him with her old-fashioned black-rimmed glasses every single day. "Well, since you chose to ignore my instructions, then you can't blame me for this. I couldn't ignore the favor that Nathan had asked of me, but I could certainly torture you, couldn't I?" he thought. When Jordan saw how awkward Irene was, he felt extremely pleased and continued, "I'll leave everything to you then. If Edric is dissatisfied with the gift, I'll fire you right away." "Yes," Irene agreed reluctantly and let out a silent sigh. Jordan was due to meet some clients at noon and took Irene along with him. As usual, Jordan would drink and fool around after he was done with business. As Jordan was an infamous playboy, he and the clients were served by the top girls in the club in a private room. After a few drinks, the men gradually began to grope and fondle the girls beside them. Deciding not to be an eyesore, Irene quickly got up and informed, "Mr. Reed, I'll wait for you outside." "Run along then. Don't stray too far, lest I can't get hold of you," Jordan threatened. "I won't. I'll wait for you by the door," Irene promised and lowered her head as she made her way out. Seeing that, someone asked Jordan, "Mr. Reed, why would you get such an ugly lady to be your assistant? Don't you find her an eyesore?" "Of course I do. The sight of her face never keeps me standing," Jordan agreed maliciously. All the men in the private room roared with laughter, and Irene hastened her pace and went out of the room quickly. As Jordan had forbidden her from straying too far, she stood on standby at the corridor outside the private room. There happened to be a group of people crowded around a man walking over. When Irene saw the spirited middle-aged man surrounded by people, she instantly lowered her head and stared at her toes. Stephen Cook was about to leave with his group, but all of a sudden, as if he could sense that something was amiss, turned around. He looked at Irene, who kept her head down. Irene was his daughter, after all. Though she was dressed in old style, he recognized her at once. A look of surprise flashed in his eyes. He said something to his secretary and walked towards Irene in stride. "Irene, when did you return?" Irene raised her head and stared at Stephen indifferently before she replied, "Do you have business with me, Mr. Cook?" Stephen gazed at his daughter lovingly and was not the least affected by Irene's attitude towards him. "Where have you been? Daddy has been searching for you during the past 3 years. Why haven't you called me?" "Daddy? My father passed away a long time ago," Irene retorted icily. "Irene," Stephen pleaded. Although he was a respectable secretary in the eyes of the public, he could never put on airs and be fierce to his daughter. "You haven't eaten, have you? Let's go and have a meal." "That's not necessary. Mr. Cook, your sweet wife and loving daughter are waiting for you at home. Just accompany them." "Irene," Stephen called out and reached over to grab hold of his daughter's hand. "Let's have a meal together," he begged. "Let go of me," Irene yelled and tried to shake off his hand. However, Stephen held her hand so tightly that she couldn't get released at all. "Mr. Cook, I won't go easy on you if you keep this up." "Irene, what are you guys playing at?" a voice interrupted. Chapter 9. Beggars Must Not Be Choosers. Stephen immediately released Irene's hand. When the two of them turned around, they realized that Jordan was already standing behind them. Jordan was momentarily stunned when he realized that it was Stephen. "Mr. Cook," he greeted. "Mr. Reed," Stephen greeted and smiled awkwardly. However, Jordan added quickly with a forced smile, "Why are you holding on to my assistant's hand? Are you harassing her?" "Assistant?" Stephen repeated and stared at Jordan in surprise, before he looked at his daughter and asked, "Irene, are you working for Mr. Reed?" "Irene, why are you addressing her so lovingly?" "Mr. Cook, I believe my assistant could already pass off as your daughter. Besides, she's not good-looking. It'd be a great mistake to have eyes for her. It'll be terrible to be embroiled in a nasty scandal," Jordan reminded sharply, and pulled Irene over to his side as he spoke. "Have eyes for her? Embroiled in a nasty scandal?" Stephen repeated, and quickly realized that Jordan had misunderstood his relationship with Irene. However, when he saw how protective Jordan was of his daughter, instead of being angry, he burst into laughter. Jordan was handsome and graceful, the CEO of the Golden Age Group of Haverland. Stephen couldn't help but think how wonderful it would be if Irene could date Jordan. However, now was not the right time to explain his relationship with Irene. Thus, Stephen merely looked at Jordan with a profound smile, before he replied, "Mr. Reed, I have something on today. I'll have to excuse myself. See you next time." Jordan's expression gradually darkened as he watched Stephen leave. He then released Irene's hand contemptuously and chided, "Are you a fool? Do you enjoy holding hands with an old man in public?" "No." "No, is that true? I mean, Irene, are you just so desperate for a man that you'd hook up with any old man?" Jordan indeed had a vile tongue. Irene could only deny with a bitter smile, "Mr. Reed, it's not what you think." "I hope so. As my assistant, you should pay attention to your public image and moral integrity. Otherwise, I'll fire you." "Got it. It won't happen again." Jordan felt quite appeased seeing how submissive she was, and he ordered, "You don't have to attend the gathering tonight. Go back and get some rest. I have something for you to do tomorrow. By the way, make an appointment with Lulu." "Okay," Irene replied. It was rare of Jordan to show mercy on Irene and allow her to go back home and rest. Delighted at the huge surprise, Irene headed back home after calling Lulu on Jordan's behalf. As Irene's uncle had always been in poor health, she made a trip to the market on her way home and bought some fish, prawns, and chicken. so that she could whip up something nourishing for her uncle. However, when Irene was coming out from the supermarket, a car suddenly rushed towards her from the side of the road. Unable to dodge in time, Irene was hit by the car and fell to the ground. Her palm and legs were badly grazed and ached terribly. When she tried to get back on her feet, she could not seem to summon the strength to do so. The driver quickly got out of the car and asked, "Are you all right?" "I can." When Irene saw who the driver was, she stopped short. The driver too stared at her in surprise. Young madam. Young madam, Edric already ditched her a long time ago." "Mind your words," a loud, arrogant voice interrupted. Margaret Moore, who was in the back seat of the car, got out before she approached Irene with an imposing aura. There was not an ounce of sympathy on her face when she stared at Irene. Instead, she merely sneered and remarked, "Irene, did you do that on purpose? You failed to seduce Edric, so you did this to attract his attention, didn't you? How lowly is that?" Irene was boiling with rage and retorted, "Madam Myers, you're really good at making irresponsible remarks, aren't you?" "Irresponsible remarks? Back then you seduced Edric using this way too? Why? Are you nervous now that Edric's going to be engaged to Lily? Are you trying to create trouble for us again?" Margaret stared at Irene with contempt. This was the kind of gaze that Irene had been subjected to almost every day for the past 3 years that she was married to Edric. In the past, she couldn't talk back to Margaret as she was her daughter-in-law. But now that she had divorced Edric, she found no reason to put up with Margaret's rude, unreasonable behavior. Irene sneered coldly and rebuked, "Don't worry. I've had enough of an unfaithful jerk like Edric. I'd be crazy to want to have anything to do with him." In the past, Irene had always been obedient and submissive to Margaret and would never retaliate, no matter how Margaret chastised her. But today, she actually insulted Margaret's son in her presence. Unable to put up with this, Margaret struck her across the face. Irene, who was struggling to stand up, fell back on the ground from the impact of the blow. By then, a crowd had gathered around them. Unable to tolerate Margaret's bullying, the crowd began to criticize her. How could she do this? How could she be so arrogant after knocking the lady down? Let's call the police. Chapter 10. You are nothing without me. Margaret was not the least afraid when she heard that someone wanted to call the police. Instead, she raised her voice and hollered, "Who do you think you're defending? Tell you what, this wretch is well known for her viciousness. She murdered someone 3 years ago. In order to seduce my son, she pushed down my daughter-in-law, who was 4 months into her pregnancy, and caused her miscarriage." Margaret was a master in twisting the facts. When the crowd heard what she said, they immediately glanced at Irene disdainfully and criticized. "Who'd expect that a young girl like you could be so vicious?" Irene was so angry that her entire body began to quiver. She initially wanted to let things slide and leave, but after Margaret provoked her, she grabbed her phone and called the police. The police quickly arrived, but Margaret threatened arrogantly, "Do you know who my son is? He's Edric Myers, and Mr. Cook is my in-law. Take a look at yourself before you mess with me." As the police knew who Edric Myers and Mr. Cook were, they did not dare to settle the matter based on their protocol. Instead, they turned and began to persuade Irene. "It's just a small matter. Why don't you let things slide after accepting some money from Madam Myers?" "I'll never do that. Why should I?" Irene retorted. "You wouldn't get anything out of this, even if you were to sue her. You're merely slightly injured, and the person behind the wheel was the driver. The worst that could happen to them would be to compensate you, and the case will then be closed. Besides, she's Mr. Myers' mother and related to Mr. Cook. There's no way an ordinary person like you could win a fight against her." The police was telling the truth, which sounded unusually harsh in Irene's ears, but she stood to her ground and was determined not to let Margaret off the hook. There was nothing the police could do. When they noticed that Irene's hands and feet were injured, they had to send her off to the hospital first. Right after the doctor was done with bandaging her wounds, she heard the sound of rushed footfall. The door was quickly flung open, and Edric appeared with his executive assistant, John. Irene was stunned to see Edric. As the doctor knew Edric, he greeted him respectfully. "Mr. Myers, could you give us a moment? I need to have a word with her." The doctor nodded and quickly left. Edric looked down at Irene condescendingly and asked icily, "Say it. How much do you want from us?" Irene never expected him to say that from the start. She began to quiver with rage as she said, "Myers, did you think that everyone is as shameless as you? Did you think that we're all money grubbers like you? Sure, you're so noble and virtuous, but you still landed yourself in such a pathetic, downtrodden state." Edric sneered before he resumed, "Irene, you're nothing without me." Edric was the one who wanted to divorce Irene and had forced her to leave him without a penny to her name. But now, he was behaving as if she was the one in his debt. How could he be so shameless? Irene wondered, and her heart began to ache. After she pursed her lips and suppressed the pain in her heart, she smiled at Edric and retorted, "Without you, at least I could still be Irene Nelson. Edric, you know what? Those 3 years with you were like a living hell for me. Now that I finally regained my old life, I could live as I please. I wouldn't have to put up with your mother's beatings and scolding, and neither do I have to tolerate you anymore. So why shouldn't I be satisfied?" Edric's eyes darkened dangerously, and he replied, "If that's the case, then why did you come back?" "My home's in San Fatillo. I certainly don't need your permission to return home, do I, Mr. Myers?" "No, it's not necessary. But Irene, be true to your heart. Are you sure that you didn't return because you know that I'm about to get engaged to Lily?" "Haha, Mr. Myers, you think too highly of yourself. It's miserable to meet a jerk like you, and once is enough for me. No matter how blind I am, I wouldn't subject myself to a revolting experience like that again. Don't worry, I shall definitely avoid you when I see you." The polite way she addressed him and the cold way she looked at him made him strangely upset. He couldn't help but wonder if the woman before him was still the Irene Nelson whom he had loved for 5 years. In the past, Irene would always smile at him sweetly and never sounded so harsh. She would often snuggle up in his arms. But the current Irene was like a hedgehog. There wasn't an ounce of affection in her eyes when she looked at him, only resent and contempt. This isn't how things should be. She's the one at fault. How could she be so self-righteous? He thought. Containing the roiling emotions in his heart, Edric rebuked, "That's great. Miss Nelson, I hope that you'll keep your promise and never appear before me again. Don't mess with Lily either." Then, as if he was dismissing a beggar, Edric left before tossing a gold card at her viciously. As Irene stared at the gold card, she couldn't stop her tears from flooding out of her eyes. 3 years ago, he mercilessly demanded her to leave without taking a single cent from him. 3 years later, the first thing he did when he met her was to send her to the police station. Now, he was even humiliating her viciously like this. Irene hated herself for liking a revolting man like him, and for putting up with the 3 years of living hell for his sake. Chapter 11. Settle the score. Irene limped out of the hospital. Not far from the hospital, she saw a beggar squatting on the ground and asking for money. She casually threw Edric's gold card to the beggar. The beggar held the gold card and looked at her incredulously. Irene took 2 steps and turned back to tell the beggar, "There's no password and no limit. You can take as much as you want." Looking at the beggar picking up the gold card and going to the ATM nearby, Irene let out a sigh of relief. The anger that she had held in her heart had finally been relieved a little. "Aren't you a rich and pretentious guy, Mr. Myers? I'll let you pretend." She stopped a car in a cheerful mood and went home. With her hands and legs injuries in the accident, Irene didn't go to work the next day and called for leave. Jordan answered the phone in a sharp and harsh tone. "Irene Nelson, are you pushing your luck with me because I let you go home early yesterday? Are you becoming a goof-off?" "That's not true, Mr. Reed. Seriously, my hands and legs are injured." "I don't think your voice sounds like something's wrong. As long as you can get up, You'll come to work immediately. Crawl to the company if you have to. Jordan hung up the phone after that. Irene flared up. Jordan's unpredictable mood made it impossible for her to work for him. But beggars couldn't be choosers. She swallowed her anger and went to the company. Irene pushed open the door of the president's office. Jordan was leaning against the chair and making a phone call. He was stunned when he saw her limping in with gauze wrapped around her hands. Are you really injured, or just faking it to fool me? I'm really injured. Come and let me check, Jordan ordered rudely. Irene walked to him with downcast eyes. Before Irene could reach out her hand, Jordan grabbed her hand and unwrapped the gauze. He finally believed it when he saw the wound. What's wrong with you? Why do you act rashly as soon as you came back? You had a dispute with others at the party before, and now you hurt yourself? I didn't want it to happen, Irene answered with her head lowered. She was so close to Jordan that he could smell the fragrance on her body. Jordan was suddenly aroused. He had never liked this assistant that Nathan White assigned to him, so he had never looked at her seriously. Today, he unexpectedly found something different about her when he was face to face with her. Her fingers were slender and white, and he could clearly see her slender, smooth, and fair neck when she was standing in front of him with her head lowered. He felt his heartbeat faster. Was he possessed? How could he be interested in such an old-fashioned and unexciting woman? Jordan instantly recalled that Irene had never looked him in the eye since the day she started to work for him. She always looked down deferentially. It was nothing he hated more than a dull person like this. However, he suddenly realized today that something was wrong. Jordan was very handsome. Countless women couldn't wait to throw themselves on him. Why did this young woman not show that kind of affection for him? This idea irritated Jordan at once. He ordered Irene in an angry voice, "Raise your head." Irene lowered her head and whispered slowly, "Mr. Reed, please tell me if you need anything." Jordan was furious that she didn't listen to his command. He grabbed Irene's chin and forced her to raise her head. Irene bore the pain and looked at Jordan as he forced her head up. What Jordan saw was a pair of extremely bright eyes. He bit back the vicious words he was going to say. Instead, he was surprised by this woman's beautiful eyes. Jordan was used to being casual and did not care about anything. He pulled off the glasses Irene was wearing and had a closer look at her eyes. Her facial features were exquisite and her skin was very smooth. Her charming eyes were especially dazzling. Jordan cursed in a low voice. "Nathan White, I'm not done with you." Irene didn't understand what was wrong with Jordan and why he cursed Nathan White out of the blue. Her chin was in pain from his grip. She held back her anger and said, "Mr. Reed, can you let me go?" "Let you go? Okay, no problem. But you have to promise me one thing." "What?"